We're now on Daf Yud Chesamid Beis, and we're trying to investigate whether or not a mincha could be ksheira without any blila at all. Vatnan, we learned in a Mishnah. This Mishnah is at the end of Maseches Menachos. Shishim nivlolim. The issue here is how much oil can you? I'm sorry. Let's see. How much kemach? Right. You're going to add a log shemen to a certain volume, let's call it an isaron of kemach, and it's all in one kli. So we're trying to figure out what's the maximum amount of kemach, meaning the isronim of kemach, such that when you add the log shemen in one kli, you still have enough room to do the blila. If there's too much kemach, let's say 61 esronim, because 60 is the cutoff point, then when you add the log shemen, there won't be a successful blila. So the Mishnah says, shishim nivloim, if you have 60 esronim of kemach in one kli, and then you add the log shemen, then nivlolim, you can successfully achieve blila and mix it all together. But shishim v'echad, if you have 61 esronim in one kli, eina nivlolim. I guess it means like the shemen is going to seep through, maybe part of the kemach, but you won't be able to do a complete blila and mix it all together. So therefore, no single mincha can contain more than 60 esronim of flour, because if there's more than 60 esronim of flour, it's too large of a measure to become thoroughly mixed with the oil, the shemen of the mincha. But if, on the other hand, you have a mixture of shemen with 60 esronim, or less than 60 esronim, then you can achieve blila. Kiavinin ba, and the Gemara was bothered at the end of Menachos, ki einam nivlolamai havi. Who cares if there's 61 esronim of kemach? So you won't be able to do the blila. Who says that you have to have blila? For Tanan, we have a Mishnah, our Mishnah that we just learned, on the list of things that in their absence the mincha is still kshera, we have blila. That means lo balal kshera. So how could the Mishnah tell me that if you have more than shishim esronim in the kli, then you won't be able to do blila? Who cares? Kilo bala, we saw in that Mishnah that the mincha is still kshera. So in order to answer this question, we invoke the principle of Rabbi Zera. This is a principle that applies all over Shas. Amar Rabbi Zera, kol haroy lebila ein bila ma'keves bo, because she'ein roy lebila is then bila ma'keves bo. They use the word bila, but the same as blila. So that according to Rabbi Zera, even in the absence of blila, the mincha is still kshera. That's as far as the Maisa Gavra. That's as far as the person doing the act of Belila, lo balal kshera. But as far as the chefta of the karman, the chefta has to be roy lebila. And therefore, if he puts more than 60 esronim into the kli, it's not roy lebila, and that passes the mincha. The act of Belila itself is not likuva, but the mixture in the kli has to be roy lebila. That is the famous principle of Rabbi Zera. For example, the Gemara says that an Elam who cannot speak might not be able to do Yibum, because the Torah requires a declaration. The Gemara says, but the declaration is not likuva. For the answer is you need someone who's roy for the declaration. Or, for example, I'll give you another example that comes off to the top of my head. Lulav has to be 4 tefachim high so that it's capable of nanuim. They added another tefach on top of the 3. But the Gemara says, you don't even have to do nanuim. If you just lift up the lulav, you yotze. But the answer is the lulav has, as a chefta, has to be roy lenanuim. And therefore we need the 4th tefach. So again, whenever you distinguish between the chefta and the requirements of the chefta for a certain mitzvah, as opposed to the maisa gavra, the actual act, you always will implement and apply the principle of Rabbi Zera. Kol haroy lebila ein bila ma'keves. As long as the chefta lends itself to the maisa gavra of blila, the carbon is kosher. But ein haroy leblila is then blila ma'keves, even though the maisa gavra of blila is not critical. So therefore, the Mishnah that says that if you lo bolal is kosher is only referring to a mincha that has up to but not beyond 60 esronim of kemach. So it's royal abila. So again, in the absence of blila, the carbon is kosher, the mincha is kshera. So the Gemara asked, so the Gemara said, oh wait, so where are we holding now? Are we holding by an answer or a question? Just 1 second. Right. Oh, yeah. Then let's be consistent and apply the same rules to Yitzika. And therefore, all you need is that it be royally Yitzika. But the act of Yitzika itself is not likuva. So Gemara says, no, you don't have to apply the same interpretation to both bolal and yotzak, midiria, ha-kidi isa, ha-kidi isa. Lo yotzak means that you must have a yitzika, but you don't have to have a yitzika of a kohen. It's therefore lo yotzak kohen elazar, and therefore the minchas kshera, since there was a yitzika, albeit through by a zar. But again, that means that yitzika is likuva, and that we assume because the Torah repeats yitzika and kol makom she'nishina is likuva. But in the case of bolal, it doesn't mean that there was no blila by a kohen, but there was blila by a zar in there for kshera, but lo bolal klal. Here we're going to interpret the words lo bolal means there was no blila at all. It was only royal blila, which means that there was 60 esronim, but the actual act of blila is not critical. Next, oshep sosan pitim merubos kshera. I don't get it. The Mishnah has to tell me that if he only broke it into larger pieces, the mincha is kshera. I don't get it. We don't even need psisa. Hashtalo pasas klal kshera. Is psisa merumi boy? Even if you completely omitted psisa, which we saw in the Viresha of the Mishnah, lo pasas, which means lo pasas klal, so the psisa is not critical. Now you have to tell me that if he breaks it down into larger parts, it's kshera. So Gemara says, "My piece in merubos sheriba b'psisin." So we thought originally that when the Mishnah says piece in merubos, we thought he broke it up into larger pieces. No. That's not what the word merubos means. Merubos doesn't mean the size of the pieces, but rather it means the number of pieces. That if he broke it down into very, very small parts, and he has many, many psisin, then you might think that the carbon is possible. Now, how much does the how many pieces, shall we say, does the Korban Mincha require? So that's again, as I said before, this whole sugya is really on Daf Ayin Hey, and there a mincha should be folded in half, then into quarters, then broken along the folds. This person in our Mishnah went ahead and he broke it into even smaller pieces. So that's called, in the language of the Mishnah, psisin merubos. Even though the mincha was broken into more pieces than the prescribed number, it's still ksher. The Gemara gives another answer to this question. Liolam pisim merubas mamish. Let's take it at its literal interpretation that he had large pieces. Meruba means very large. Umau detema. How could it be that I would entertain the possibility that if he broke it down into larger pieces, maybe the minchas psula, when we know you don't even have to have psisa? And the Gemara says, Mao detema. I would have thought. Hasam hu de ika Torahs chalas aleim aval hacha de lo Torahs chalas ika the lo Torahs psisit ika is therefore the minchas psula kamashmal and the mincha is still ksher. So what was the havamina that if he broke it down into larger pieces, the mincha might be psula? And the answer is the following: if he didn't break the mincha at all, the mincha is kshera. Why? Because what we need is Torahs chalos. And we have Torahs chalos, because the mincha is going to be baked. And once you bake the mincha, it has a Torahs challah. Aval hacha, what about our case, where we have mina that the mincha is psula, because he broke it down into larger pieces, to lav Torahs chalas ika, v'lad Torahs psisin ika. In other words, it's too large to be considered psisin, but yet it's not large enough to be considered chalos. The pieces have status neither of chalos nor of psisin. Okay. I'll just read one note over here. He says, not to say that the loaves are entirely whole, for in fact, when the Mishnah speaks of a mincha that was not broken, it means that it was broken just enough to allow a kometz to be taken. When the Gemara states that this mincha has a status of a whole loaf, it means that since it was only minimally broken. Okay, fine. Next, now we get to the sugya of Rabbi Shimon. As I said, today's daf is made of very small pieces or a larger piece. So now we explain that the Mishnah allows Yitzika even in a non-Kohen, and that's what it means lo yotzak. We must have Yitzika, but it can be done by a non-Kohen. The Gemara says lemas nisa Rabbi Shimon. This against Rabbi Shimon deciding. We learned in the Brisa Rabbi Shimon Omer kol Kohen she'eino moda ba'avoda ein lo chelik b'kuhuna. Okay, so now we're going to go through a list of, I think it's 15. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll see the number in a minute. Of 15 dimensions of avodas kahuna, that if a Kohen denies any one of the 15, then he's excluded from any of the rights of a Kohen to receive whatever the Kohen has to receive. And the point is that on this list, we're going to have Yitzika, which implies that, like all the other 14 delineated avodos, you require Kohen. So Reb Shimon is going to say that you require Kohen for Yitzika. Reb Shimon Omer, Kol Kohen she'eino moda ba'avoda ein lo chelik b'kuhuna, shenemar. Okay, this drasha is a bit complicated, but let's just read it. Hamakriv es dam hashlomim ves hachelev mi bnei Aaron lo sia shok hayamin lemona. So we're talking about lo with a vav and the shok, which is one of the matnas kahuna. So the Kohen has the right to receive the shok and the chelev of shlomim. Okay. So how do we darshan this pasuk? Says Reb Shimon. Okay, let me just see if he points out. Okay. Is mod bavoda yesh lo chelik b'kahuna she'ena mod bavoda ein lo chelik b'kahuna. So how does he see this in the pasuk? I was very confused about this. Okay, fine. Oh, here it is. Let's see. So we're talking about the rights of the Kohen to receive certain portions of the shlomim, which is called chelev and shok. And a Kohen who does not accept the avoda does not receive his portion of this. Why? The pasuk describes the Kohen who receives the portion as hamakriv. Oh, okay. So now we're getting somewhere. The emphasis here is on the word hamakriv. Oh, okay. This is a little anticlimactic. He says the fact that he performs the avoda is evidence that he accepts it. You know, he believes that God gave this responsibility to the Kohen. And somebody who denies that God ever commanded us to do this or that, he will not have any portion of the sacrificial foods. Weiter. The Ainli Elazu Bevad. Now, the pasuk is referring to Makriv Shlom. But Minayin L'Rabos Chameshes Avodos. Now we have a list of 15 different avodos, which require Kohen, a Kahuna, and require that the Kohen admits that the Torah that God commanded us for the Bnei Aaron, for the Kohanim, to do these avodos. Number one is Yitzikos. And this is going to be the most important one on the list for our purposes in our context, because this brisa, which is authored by Reb Shimon, is claiming that Yitzika is an avodah performed by the Kohen. And that's against our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says lo yotzak, which means lo yotzak Kohen elazar, and yet the minchas kshera. Whereas Reb Shimon says it's critical to have a Kohen. Ve'ablilos, ve'apsisos, ve'amalichos, ve'atnufos, ve'agoshos, ve'akmitzos. Right, we know the kmitza requires a Kohen. Ve'aktoros. Now, what is he talking about? Haktoros, he says here, this is the Haktoras ha'imurim ala mizbeach. And, of course, the komets of the mincha. Ve'amalikos, right? Any bird offering needs malika, and it has to be done by Kohen. Ve'hakabolos, who's going to receive the dam and the mizrach from the tzavar habehema, it's going to be the Kohen. Ve'azos, all the sprinklings in the avodas pnim, inside the heichal. Sprinkling sacrificial blood. I don't appreciate the English translation here, but anyway, both. Oh, so he's talking about chatos hapnimis, which is done on the paroches or in the mizbeach hazov. Oh, and also the throwing of ordinary korbanos. Okay, so it's not sprinkling; it's throwing. So that's in the mizbeach hachitzon. Next, vashkos sota. Interesting that the Torah requires a Kohen for hashkos sota. The rite of making the sota drink is performed by a Kohen. Next, arifas ha'egla, right? You find a slain body between two cities, and Torah requires that you measure the distance between the slain body and these two cities to determine which city is closer, and then you do a whole process called arichvas egla. Take an egla down to Nachal and they break its neck, and that has to be done by a Kohen. Vaita, Taras HaMitzora, right? You have to put the Lug Shemen here and here and here, and that requires a Kohen. Now, I'm not sure. It seems that the list here all of a sudden kind of moved away. Like up until number 10, number 11, I should say, that's Hazos. It was all part of the Avodas HaKorban. Then we have Hashkas Sota, which has nothing to do with the Beis HaMikdash. Arifas HaEgel has nothing to do with the Beis HaMikdash. Taras HaMitzora has a requirement of kahuna, but it's not really part of the avoda. But anyway, these are the 15 things. Oh, the last one is duchenin, right? Nesias kapayim, bein mibifnin, bein b'chutz. There's two different nesias kapayim. There's one inside the azara, and there's one outside the azara. Minayin. So again, Rabbi Shimon says that the Kohen has to accept these avodas as given from Shamayim. And how do we know this? Talmud Lomer b'bnei Aaron. Avoda mesura l'bnei Aaron. Kol Kohen, right? Is Kol Kohen shein modava, ein lo chelik b'kuhuna. So again, the sugya is not happy with the fact that our Mishnah here is against Rabbi Shimon lo kasha. So Rabbi Nachman says no. There's no contradiction between our Mishnah and the Brisa of Rabbi Shimon. Why? Kan b'minchas kohanim v'kan b'minchas Yisrael. So when does Rabbi Shimon hold that every Kohen has to accept all the above, including Yitzika? That's in the case of a minchas kohen. And a minchas kohanim does not require, just 1 second. Let's see if I can get this straight. How much time do we have? We have a few minutes. We really, okay, so we'll have to leave that for tomorrow, but the point is that Kan b'minchas Yisrael, right, our Mishnah, which implies that you don't need a coin for Yitzika, that's in the case of Minchas Yisrael, because Minchas Yisrael, the Bas Kmitza, now we have the principle that I mentioned over and over again, that when do we require kahuna? From Kmitza v'elech. And that applies to a Minchas Yisrael, because there's Kmitza and a Minchas Yisrael. What we're missing, which I'll fill in tomorrow, B'lineder, is Minchas Kohanim. Why don't they require Kmitza? We have to figure that out. I'm sorry, I just don't remember that right now. But Mikmitza v'elech mitzvahs kahuna, limit al Yitzika u'belila sheksher bizar. Since Yitzika and Belila are preliminary avodos, right, preparing the Yitzik, the Kmitza, therefore ksher bizar. But Minchas Kohanim, here it says explicitly, the lav bas Kmitza is no Kmitza. I don't know why yet. Mikara boy kahuna. You don't have this principle of Yitzika v'elech because there is no Kmitza in the Minchas Kohanim, and therefore we require a Kohen. He says a Mincha brought by Kohanim does not have a Kmitza, but is burnt on the Mizbech in its entirety. Okay, so that's what we have to know. But again, our Mishnah could now be reconciled with Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah permits a non-Kohen to do the Yitzika, and the Karba, the Mincha, is still Kshera. That's because we're talking about a Minchas Yisrael, and Yitzika is before Kmitza. The Gemara doesn't like it. Amalei Rava Michti. Minchas Kohanim Meheches Rabbi Liyitzika. Even though a Minchas Kohanim does not require Kmitza, but it does require Yitzika. And we learned that from Minchas Yisrael is Ma Hasam, just like in Minchas Yisrael, which is the Malamed, is Kshera Bizar, because it's prior to Kmitza. Af Hochanami, here too, in the case of the Mincha of a Kohen, is Kshera Bizar. So therefore, Yitzika is Kshera Bizar. Because again, the fact that Yitzika is at all required in the case of Minchas Kohen is a derivative of Minchas Yisrael, and Minchas Yisrael is Kshera Bizar. Do we have 2 more minutes just to, you know what, let's stop here. Better, quit while you're ahead. So we almost caught up, but we need another 3-4 minutes. We'll finish that up tomorrow at 9:30. Okay, I'm getting the hang of it. Okay, have a great day.